This was really unique. So the example that I gave to you guys before, you go up to the Athabasca region of Alberta, you destroy the water, and one of the companies that is profiting from the area and producing the oil sands, called Albion Sands, has their own water that they're selling as well. Very convenient, right? So I was just shocked when I saw this. I went up there and I'm going to Indigenous communities that basically can't drink their water anymore, and Albion Sands is bringing bottled water to them, right? Like just like the level of disgust I had to take the picture just so I could tell people about it. So bottled water, understanding the bottled water industry. So lots of fresh water, as I just mentioned, creates a market for bottled water. And one of the key things there is that, going back to this idea that I mentioned at the beginning about the commons, is that when you're living next to a river and you're farming and you're going there and you're grabbing water, you're going to take care of it, right? But when you get displaced, and this is what happens with industry, is that you have, you know, a huge gas project that's going to be proposed in northern BC right now, which will probably force largely farmers and people in the Indigenous communities to migrate out of the area. You come to urban centers, so you're removed from the water. People talk about the same thing when they talk about the 100-mile diet, right? Like being close to your food, understanding it, taking care of it. And industry does not want that. It doesn't serve, it's not in their benefit for water to remain clean, to remain drinkable, because it's not good for their profits. And whatever, I had a debate. I went down to Kelowna and there was this guy from the C.D. Howe Institute, who's basically a mouthpiece for the bottled water industry, who's debating with me the commodification of water. And you can't argue that. He could not argue the fact that if water resources continue to disappear on the planet, it's good for industry. That's a basic market analysis. I'm not an economist. He is. He loves the market and market analysis. He had to agree with that. And that's what I think is really important about this. Conservation versus consumption. Even when you are producing water, you're not going to try to be like, well, we shouldn't be drinking too much of it because you want to profit. So even in the case that, you know, something's absolutely destroyed, one of the things that you'll realize is that a lot of the water and the groundwater that's depleted around the world is actually done by the bottled water industry. It's not that, like, it's done by industry and all sorts of stuff, but the bottled water industry in itself wants you to drink more water, even more water than you need to drink at times. So it's not really about water conservation at all. The politics, like I mentioned before, based on money and class and access, I mean, really, when we're talking about the poorest people around this planet, people, I know an area that I would visit in India and Rajasthan where women literally walk half a day one way and a half a day back to get water for their community. And you have Coca-Cola plants in Rajasthan, a desert state, that are pumping water out of the ground, right? And this is really what it's about. It's the poor will not be able to afford water. And you know, some of us will be okay, right? I mean, technically, in the first world especially, not everybody in the first world, I mean the downtown east side of Vancouver, not everyone's going to be able to afford enough water, but really, it's the poor that are going to pay. And the interesting thing is that when we talk about this stuff, the last thing on this slide is just about Indigenous communities, right? For a long time, we're told that their ways were backwards. My mom's village in India was told that they were backwards. They had a hand pump, they didn't have like water running everywhere, they weren't quote-unquote industrialized. But what we're realizing now is that they were protecting their resources. They were protecting the environment around them. And so realizing that even today in BC, Adams Lake up in Squamish territory, Fish Lake, which you'll hear a lot about in the next coming months, in Sokotan territory. These lakes are being proposed as dumping sites for mining waste. Lakes in BC. And the Indigenous communities in these territories are fighting these expansions. So just like sort of remembering that we have this colonial history that unfortunately marginalized these communities, but yet we know that in many ways they were doing what we needed to do all along. And now we are. The biggest reason about bottled water in many ways, right? The waste. It's shocking, it's unbelievable. I don't know if people have gone onto YouTube and seen that little circle in the middle of the Pacific Ocean of just plastic waste. It's disgusting. There's this huge circle of just plastic waste that you find. Fish are like, you know, being found with like debris in their digestive systems. And this is just a small portion of what we're talking about here. 2 million plastic bottles are used every 5 minutes in the US. 2 million plastic bottles. And we have to remember that the production of plastic bottles is hugely, hugely intensive. It's an oil industry, right? Like we're going back to talking about the tar sands, the bottom of the barrel of like, you know, people trying to hang on to the oil industry. And this is a part of it. Plastic bottles are a part of it. And the other thing, when I mentioned this US stat, I always hate using US stats in Canada, partly because I think we get this sense of like, oh, they're so bad over there. But when you realize, and a lot of statistics have shown, that we in Canada actually consume more per capita than a US citizen does, especially water, right? But I think generally waste, all sorts of stuff as well. Like, I mean, we produce a lot of waste in this country. And then only 20 to 50% of the bottles are actually recycled. Industry will tell you, oh, we're recycling, but in reality, there's not a lot of recycling being done. At the bottom, I put their environmental crisis. We need to worry about the plastic bottles, but then we talk about the economic crisis, right? And the reason why I put it there is because we're hearing all about it, right? These bailouts, what happened in the U.S., yada, yada, yada. And what we're basically like countering here is that bottled water wants to do to water what they did to your money and your economy. They want to put it on this like idea that it will grow forever, will profit forever, people will make money, and that's the best way to do things. We've realized now that it's not always the best way to do things. There's like certain issues that might come up, like collapse of an economy. And do we really want to put what is already a scarce water system in the hands of people that aren't really going to care for it? Industry is looking out for number one. Millions of liters are pumped every day. I mentioned that. Bottled water is not safer than tap water. I think people already know that. The whole idea of people, you know, using these stainless steel water containers now is realizing, one, in terms of just the plastic that's being used is not that safe. But in addition to that, people have probably heard that Dasani in the UK was exposed for actually just bottling tap water, right? That's what they were doing, and had to do some PR about it. And then in the end, who's looking out for, if they're looking out for number one, who's looking out for the public? And it's you guys. It's us, right? It's people. And, you know, to a certain extent, we need to realize, don't depend on the government to take care of this problem. Don't depend on corporations, obviously, to take care of this problem. But people, like the amazing initiative that students here at Kwantlen have done, are ultimately really gonna hold people accountable and make sure that water stays in the commons and controlled by people. As you guys can read here, residents in this community that were forced to basically be on a grid system where they had to pay for water, at one moment had a 178% increase in their water rates. This is what will ultimately happen if we commodify water. And I'm not just saying that it'll happen right away, but in the end, when someone has an opportunity to make profit, like the way oil prices go up, like when it's in private hands, someone will just jack up water prices as well, like what happened here.